Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation by Alle McNorton, JD candidate at the University of Iowa College of Law, who will be speaking to us today on Sui Generis, Kosovo and Iowa's unique relationship with this new Balkan state. I am Sandra Morrow, ICFRC board member and host for today's program. I'm pleased and honored to announce that 2018 is our 35th anniversary for hosting community luncheon forums to address topics of international interest. We thank our members, volunteers, and interns for making these forums possible since 1983, when Sally Ride became the first American woman in space aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger. I want to acknowledge our university and community supporters, the University of Iowa's international programs, the University of Iowa's honors program, and the University of Iowa's Center for Public Policy, and the Stanley UI Foundation Support Organization for their financial support. And I thank today's special sponsors, Maureen Braddock and Mike Carberry. It is now my pleasure to introduce John Reitz, who will introduce our speaker. John.
Thank you, Sandra. So I'm a professor at the law school, and it's my pleasure to introduce Alle McNorton, who is one of our great students. She is a third-year law student at the University of Iowa College of Law, and during her spring semester, as you are about to learn, in the spring semester of 2017, she lived in Prishtina, Kosovo, and worked at the Republic of Kosovo Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She'll tell you lots more about that. At Iowa Law, she currently serves as an Iowa Law Ambassador, Senior Articles Editor for the Journal of Gender, Race, and Justice, and she is a graduate member of the UI Council on the Status of Women, as well as a research assistant for someone you know very well here, Dean and Professor Adrien Wing, the Associate Dean of Comparative and International Programs at the Iowa Law School. Alle is also a board member of Equal Justice Foundation and a member of several other organizations. So today, she's going to discuss with us the historical, legal, and international relations concepts behind Kosovo's independence and the subsequent developments. And especially, I think she'll talk about the unique relationship that Kosovo has with Iowa, and especially with the Iowa Law School. So let me ask you to join me in welcoming Alle McNorton.
Hello, thank you all for having me today. Today I'm going to talk about my experience in Kosovo and Kosovo's recent developments since the late 1990s to today and what they're facing in regard to joining the EU and other issues surrounding their, fundamental existence. So this is the basic framework that I'm going to follow is I'm going to introduce Kosovo and kind of the fundamental information that you'll need to understand this new nation, talk about the history, the conflict, and their declaration for independence, and the legal issues that surround that in regard to joining the EU. I'll also talk about the issues going forward that they face, whether it's social, political, or legal. And then I'll enter the Kosovo and Iowa's unique relationship that began with the National Guard and continues through educational partnerships with the university, in particular the College of Law. And I'll conclude with the field placement, which is what I did when I worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs doing treaty review and development. Okay, this is Kosovo. It is about half the size of New Jersey, so it's a very small country in Eastern Europe. It's a former Balkan state. It's south of Serbia and close to the Adriatic Sea. This is its capital, Prishtina. This is where I lived and worked for a semester. Some basic information. So Kosovo has about 2 million people. The last census is contested. As many things are with Kosovo, it's politicized, and so people claim that they're inflating or deflating numbers based on ethnic breakdowns, but the general consensus is that it's about 2 million people. The ethnic breakdown is 93% ethnic Albanians. The rest are about 5% Serbians, and then after that is a small amount of Egyptians, Bosniaks, Turks, and so forth. The religious breakdown, it's about 95% Muslim, and the rest are Orthodox Christian. In the capital of Prishtina, there's a grand Orthodox church, and then there's also, you can hear the Muslim call to prayer multiple times a day, which is really interesting. The official languages are Albanian and Serbian. A lot of their international documents are done in English, though, even between European states. And it's currently recognized by over 115 countries, 57.5% of the UN states, 82% of the EU states. There's 5 states that withhold: Spain, Greece, Romania, Slovenia, and Cyprus. And that's generally based because they have issues with independence issues, where they have minority populations that they're concerned could, if they approve of Kosovo's Declaration of Independence, would follow their path as well and have internal disruptions. And then 60% of OIC states, which is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. It's 57 states, and I think about 1.8 billion people are in that organization. Okay, Kosovo's constitution, they declared independence April 17th, 2008. And then they drafted their constitution. That's not correct. I think it's supposed to say February. Sorry, they declared independence the 17th of February, 2008. Their constitution was signed in April, ratified, and then it came into effect June 15th, 2008. Their constitution is interesting since it's a modern constitution. They're very, they acknowledge gender equality, the rights of disabled people, other minorities, and they specifically mention international human rights documents, which is really unique. And I think it's a push towards them joining the EU, showing that it displays that they observe European standards in regards to human rights and recognition. So a brief history of Kosovo. Since the 1st century, they've been under Slavic, Serbian, and Ottoman control. They were part of Yugoslavia, and in 1974, they were permitted a little amount of autonomy, but that was taken back in 1990. And then 1991, Yugoslavia broke up, and in the mid-90s, and I'm sure many of you remember, conflict arose between the Serbs and the Albanians, where it was forced migration. I don't like the phrase ethnic cleansing, but it's what happened. And then in 1999, NATO intervened. And since then, the UN and NATO have had administration over the state, and they have forces there still, KFOR forces. And then in 2008, Kosovo declared independence, as I previously said. In 2013, Kosovo and Serbia initiated normalization talks so that they can try to, Serbia doesn't acknowledge Kosovo, but they're trying to make it so that both can have a peaceful existence and hopefully both can join the EU eventually. In 1917, actually on my first day in Kosovo, Serbia sent a train into North Kosovo that said, "Kosovo is Serbian," and 20 languages on the side, which could have been seen as an act of war, and I'm glad that it wasn't because I had just gotten there and I was jet lagged. And then in 2017, just this summer when I got back to America, there was a constitutional crisis because a government was failed to form. And so they've been dealing with a lot of stuff in the past year. Okay, the conflict's impact, and this is in reference to the 1999 war. There were a total of 13,000 deaths, 11,000 Albanian, 2,000 Serbians. There was an extensive amount of forced migration that even was felt in America, where people came here to live whenever they couldn't live in Kosovo anymore. And in response to this, and in the conflict that ensued after the breakdown of Yugoslavia, there was the International Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. And it just concluded, I think, about 2 months ago. And there was 161 total indictments. It included over 10,000 days of court time, 24 years. They interviewed over 4,000 witnesses, and 2.5 million pages of transcripts were created because of this. And yeah, and also, so they tried those crimes. And then after that, so after the conflict, there were issues of organized crime and organ transplant trafficking. And so that's what the Kosovo Specialist Chambers is. And that is a very big deal right now. It came out of a Council of Europe report in 2011, where it said that former KLA leaders, who are now political leaders, like the president, were somehow related to organized crime and organized organ trafficking out of a home in North Albania. This is a picture of the yellow house that has become so infamous. The Constitution was modified in August 2015 to permit the court because it's a unique court because it's under Kosovo's law, but it's located in The Hague. And the judges come from EU member states, the USA, and Canada. We actually have an Iowa judge, Charles L. Smith, who's been there in 2012 and 2013. He's going to serve on that panel as well. And within Kosovo, it's a very hot topic. There's not a lot of public awareness about it. 76.4% of ethnic Albanians view this court as unfair as well. When you can't just have victor's justice, and so there is tension between the Albanians who were targeted in the 90s, but also if anything bad happened after that, that was committed by the KLA, both sides, there needs to be equitable relief. And then additionally, 51% of ethnic Albanians said that they are willing to protest if KLA fighters are indicted. And then this is another big issue, which I'll touch on later, but public confidence in witness protection is low for the witnesses of this case. But however, 64.8% of Albanians and 53.2% of Serbians believe that it's important to deal with all crimes committed during and in the aftermath of the conflict. And so if over 64% of people, Albanians, who would be the topic of this court, feel that way, I think the international community should support this as well, even if there is internal debate about this. Recently, the Parliament tried to change the law so that the court would not happen. And the State Department came out against that. They issued a very strong statement. Okay. And now on to sui generis and international intervention. Sui generis, as I'm sure many of you know, means of its own kind or unique. In 2010, Serbia went to the ICJ to ask whether Kosovo's independent and unilateral declaration was within international law, if it was legal. And the ICJ answered kind of in the negative, where they said it was not illegal. And so it was a little bit of an iffy decision. It wasn't the strongest wording. And so there were three main questions. That was the first one. And then it was also if the legality of the declaration fit within the UN resolution that allowed Kosovo to continue, the UN Security Council Resolution 1244. And the court held that it did not violate the resolution. And also whether the fact that the Declaration of Independence was made by the provisional institutions of self-government, because if they found that the declaration was made by that government, it would have been almost de facto illegal because that wasn't within their mandate. But they found that it was the action of a democratically elected representative of the people, which was outside of the provisional government. And so a lot of people ask, could this holding apply to other declarations? And it's yes and no. For instance, in Bosnia, if they were to declare independence if a minority was to, and it would violate the Dayton Peace Accords, but other people think that it could apply to other areas where there is a minority group that wants to secede from a larger nation, if there's instances of violence and aggression. Okay. And Kosovo and Sui Generis, many people think that Kosovo is a sui generis case, and as you can see from the quotes here, Condoleezza Rice made that statement about Kosovo, and Ban Ki-moon, the former UN Gen Secretary, did as well. And most of it is based on the violence and then the ensuing intervention from NATO and the West. Okay. And other states look to this either to help them or against them. So Spain, Catalonia would like to have their own independent nation, and Palestine as well would like to be recognized by the U.S. And so they look to Kosovo and how the U.S. recognizes them as an independent state, saying, well, we should be able to do the same thing. But then the larger states who have minorities that would like to see to secede look at it as a negative thing, like they'll be losing territory, and that it violates their national sovereignty. Okay. And you can't really talk about Kosovo and international interventions in the humanitarian human rights context and sui generis without talking about responsibility to protect. The idea kind of came about in the early 1990s because of the conflict in the Balkans and Rwanda. NATO intervened, obviously, in Kosovo in '99, and it was criticized by many as a violation of the prohibition of the use of force and against a violation of national sovereignty. And it sparked a huge debate in the international community of how to react when gross and systematic human rights violations occurred. And so the International Committee on Intervention and State Sovereignty, which is a Canadian NGO, promulgated this report that said that it's an affirmative duty for each state and their citizens for each state to not abuse their citizens, but also there's a residual duty for the broader international community to protect individuals internationally. And in 2005, the UN World Summit committed this idea and all of the states did as well. That document, I'm not going to click on the hyperlink because I don't want to mess this PowerPoint up. And this idea is promoted by a lot of international NGOs, such as the International Coalition for the Responsibility to Protect. And when you think about this, is Kosovo really unique then? If the basis for Kosovo being unique was that there was aggression and violence and then an international intervention, that made that sui generis. Today, you can't, if something bad happens in Yemen, we'll know in half an hour, and then there'll be intervention. Can that be, sui generis seems like a broader concept now that we're all connected internationally, where the international community is more engaged than we ever have been before. And so it almost makes the basis for the intervention easier to meet if everyone in the world knows what's happening and knows about abuses when they're happening. Okay, Kosovo and EU membership. They signed the Stabilization and Association Agreement in 2016, which began the process for the, Kosovo to join the EU. They have a lot of changes to make in regard to social, economic, and political conditions in their country. They don't really have an economy right now, which I don't know if you see the little questionnaire. It's because they haven't tapped into their agriculture and they don't really have any exports. But they also have issues with rule of law, unemployment, and there is a very strong political divide in the nation. There are other potential states going up for EU membership as well, and they're generally in Eastern Europe, as you can see. And the biggest blockade outside, in addition to the economy and law, is that they are not recognized unilaterally by all EU countries. As I said earlier, it's Spain, Greece, Romania, Slovakia, and Cyprus, and they all have issues with minority groups that want to succeed and have autonomous states, and so it doesn't make sense for them to recognize Kosovo if they have an internal problem like that. Okay, and the basis for international recognition, it was promulgated in the 1933 Montevideo Convention on the Rights and Duties of the State. It's a three-part test. The state in question must have a defined territory, a settled population, and an effective administrative capacity. And there's almost a de facto fourth element, which is that they must have the capability of having diplomatic relations, be able to interact with other states. And this comes into question because what about if a state comes about because of aggression or violence or ethnic cleansing, as Kosovo's case? And what about unilateral declarations? Does that mean that other states should or could be able to recognize them if they don't necessarily meet this three-part test? And so, going forward, issues that Kosovo must address is legal approximation. They must get their national internal laws up to the standard of the EU. Whenever I was there, I participated in EU legal approximation trainings where members of different ministries would come in and we would teach them how to draft laws in order to meet EU standards. One in particular was packaging on cigarettes. Cigarettes in Kosovo are about like a quarter, and there's no packaging whatsoever, and that is not going to fly with the EU generally. There needs to be safety warnings, and you can't sell them to children, and so that was one big issue. Rule of law is something that Kosovo needs to kind of adopt in like their national mentality. For example, my boss, she was saying that even the cops don't obey speed signs, no one pays tickets ever. And so to have a civil society, you have to be able to respect the rule of law and the rule of government. As I said earlier, Kosovo doesn't have a very strong economy. It's based right now mainly on foreign aid. And so getting their agriculture up to date, and they're partnering with I.O.W.A on that, developing corn and how to have the most effective agricultural system possible. So that's one thing that they're working on, and they're partnering with I.O.W.A as well, which is kind of interesting. And unemployment is also a huge issue. It's about 35% total. Their youth unemployment is astronomical, and they don't have a trained workforce. There's a lot of people in higher education, but there aren't a lot of skilled workers because there just aren't jobs. But if they can transition the economy to have more jobs like that, it would present the opportunity to have economic growth for sure. And also external threats, as I said earlier, Serbia obviously does not recognize Kosovo. Serbia tried to send a train in on the first day. But the bigger issue here would also be Russia acting as the parent state to Serbia. They gifted multiple fighter jets to Serbia when I was there, and Russia has a lot of propaganda in Serbian media as well. And so that's something that is always in the back of everyone's mind in Kosovo, is how the grander scheme between U.S. and Russia is playing out between Serbia and Kosovo. Another major issue is border demarcation with Montenegro. As I don't know if you noticed earlier when I showed the map, it's dotted because there is no set border for the border between Montenegro and Kosovo. They signed an agreement and they send it to Parliament, but it has to pass with a 2/3 majority, which no one knows if that's going to happen anytime soon. So it's on the table, but it has been on the table for a while. So we'll see. And last but not least is normalization with Serbia. That Serbia will never recognize Kosovo, but if they can normalize relations enough to have a peaceful existence next to each other, that is the best solution for both states. Okay, and I wanted to give 2 examples of recent issues in the news that is just very stereotypical of issues that Kosovo face. So Haradinaj was in France, and Serbia sent an extradition request to France because they wanted to charge him with killings, torture, and abductions during the Kosovo War. And he had to stay in Kosovo he had to stay in France for months while a court in Colmar decided whether or not they were going to grant Serbia's extradition request. And they eventually decided they were not going to because they said that it would be a very unfair trial for him. And just background, he was tried and acquitted of war crimes twice in the tribunal. And so that was another factor in France's decision, is that he's already been tried, and they're not going to send him to a hostile nation to be tried again. And just last week, a Serbian politician was shot in Mitrovica, which is the second largest city in Kosovo, and it's a distinct city because there's a very harsh line between the Serbian area and the Albanian area. And he came out against Serbia and called Belgrade's policies towards Kosovo as too harsh, and he denounced them, and he was labeled a traitor. And he was there was a drive-by shooting, and they couldn't revive him when he got to the hospital. And so that's a huge issue of tension between them right now. The Serbian president actually went to his funeral. He is a Kosovan, a Kosovar. The Serbian president went to his funeral because of what an international outrage it caused in the area. Okay, and now I want to transition into Kosovo's relationship with I.O.W.A. 2 years ago, we held a self-determination conference where diplomats from multiple nations came, Kosovo, South Sudan, Palestine, they were all represented. And it was a 3-day conference held, as you can see, at the old state capitol, and it was also in Des Moines. And these are just some photos. This is Prishtina, 2 photos of the city as well. They have a Bill Clinton statue, which is kind of fun. Kosovo has wonderful skiing. I went one day with my boss's son, and the president was skiing the next day, so I just missed him. Their national library was voted one of the ugliest buildings in the world, which it's kind of endearing, like a cute way. And there is, right in the middle of the city, there's a Serbian Orthodox church, which is abandoned. There's no pews or anything. It's just a building at this point, but it's right in the middle of the city, and it shows Serbia's ever-presence, the looming presence there. This is a lake that my boss took me to once. That's also a photo. At one point we hosted, his name was Dr. Jean de Groff. He's an expert in the international law of education and minority rights, and he came and toured a lot of the public universities in Kosovo and gave a really interesting talk on minority rights, especially in regard to language in education and how should be an international standard, which is very interesting in Kosovo because there are 2 national languages and they're not a rich country, but how do you allocate funds appropriately to be able to serve all ethnic communities, which I think was a very interesting topic. And just one morsel, one tiny issue that comes about when you have such a complex situation on the ground. Oop. Sorry. Okay, this is the Church of the Black Madonna where Mother Teresa heard her calling, which is kind of interesting. This is Adem Yashari's house. Serbia attacked this and it kind of sparked the conflict. He's seen as a Nelson Mandela figure in Kosovo. The airport's named after him, as is like every public building ever. This is Prizren. This is kind of their cultural capital. They have an old castle on the hill, which is really beautiful. It's a really beautiful old town. Prishtina is very Soviet looking, and so this is definitely a much more beautiful city. Okay, and back to Iowa. So it began with the National Guard State Partnership Program. I didn't know this, but there are 65 programs where states are matched with countries all over the world, from Africa. Jordan, I think, is matched with my home state, Louisiana, which is kind of interesting. But in 2011, Iowa and Kosovo set up this program and because since 2003, 800 Iowans have been stationed in Kosovo through the placement program. And so it's soldiers and airmen of the National Guard have been there working with KFOR and NATO's military service. All NATO states send soldiers to spend time there occasionally. And so they filter in and out, but 800 Iowans have been there. And it began with an officer training program where Iowans went to Kosovo to have a 2 or 3 week training where they showed them how to most effectively have a standing military, basically. Kosovo has a consulate in Des Moines, which is new. It's in the Salary Building in Court Street. And at the time, Thaci, the man on the left, was the deputy prime minister, but now he is the president of Kosovo, which is kind of exciting. And relating to the College of Law, we have a Memorandum of Understanding with Kosovo, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It began with us, the legal clinic. We represented them and we did research on how to join the UN and the EU, how to join other treaties and international organizations, and things that you wouldn't think about, but having an unique and independent internet domain outside of Serbia was something that they needed our help to legally find a basis and create the best argument to be able to achieve these things. It was concluded in September of 2014, and then in 2015 is when the relationship grew stronger, and we came up with the externship program, which is what I did, and also we do I think it's a once a year or twice a year training where diplomats will come to the University of Iowa for about 2 weeks, and there will be one-on-one training with them and professors like Dean Wing, who is my mentor, on how best to do international law whenever you're kind of at a disadvantaged position like Kosovo. And so we also exchange literature and lectures. One interesting fact is that there's no financial obligation, but they did pay for my flight and my housing whenever I worked there. And as all university documents, there's no discrimination and equal opportunity. Okay, and so for my externship there, I was there for a year, and I was in the treaty department specifically, and I mainly did research writing, drafting, editing, and I proofread every document that left the ministry, their office, because I was the only native English speaker, and so I read everything. I did 2 major research projects. I summarized the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, which took forever because, as many of you know, I'm sure it's a very impressive document. And I also completed a questionnaire on the Apostolic Convention, which has to do with document recognition between states. That was very interesting. And I also researched different international organizations, how best to strategically position Kosovo to join them as easy as possible with as little, without allocating too many resources. And I also did a lot of memorandums of understanding and international agreements between Kosovo and different states. And let's see. Diplomatic passports was also something that I didn't think that I would spend a lot of time doing, but I drafted probably 10 international agreements on how each state would recognize diplomatic passports for diplomats and their families, and the very intricate terms of how how that maneuvered in the diplomatic relations context. Some international organizations that I did research on was the European Energy Commission, World Trade Organization, the European Bank, USAID. As I said previously, Kosovo gets a tremendous amount of foreign aid, and a lot of that comes from the U.S. And so that's something that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs deals with very intimately. Okay. And the topics of the international agreements and Memorandum of Understanding varied dramatically. A lot of them had to do with grants and financial gifts from other nations. And so a state would allocate funds specifically for healthcare development or for infrastructure. And so I would have to take previous agreements and try to draft the best possible wording going forward and how best to make sure that Kosovo allocated the funds appropriately and it was used to its best ability. And these are just some of the countries that I drafted agreements with and that I worked on research projects on with my boss, Kaltrina. As you can see, there's a lot. And yeah, that's it. That's Dean Wing, and that's the one group of diplomats that came in 2016. So thank you for your time.
Well, let's see. Some of the questions asked for some background, so let's start with the first one here. Kosovo and Bosnia. How are these populations different? Why does Kosovo not join with Bosnia-Herzegovina? We'll start with that.
Okay. From what I understand, the Bosniaks and the Albanians are two different ethnic populations, and so they have very distinct histories, and so it's not... if anything, it would be why doesn't Kosovo join Albania and form a greater Albania, but that is not politically or legally going to happen. But that would be, if there were two options, that would be the most logical one because they're ethnically, religiously, and historically the same.
Okay. So along those lines, someone wants to know how proficient your Albanian is.
I mastered about 4 words total because there's so many syllables. It's difficult. I knew hello and yes and thank you. Just smile a lot. It gets you places.
Another question, well, let's see here. Some other questions about the relationships. One question is, what is the most likely path that Kosovo can take that leads to nonviolent détente with Serbia?
That's a good question. I think it's going to be a slow process, and I think having a lot of international attention to the process is important to make sure that both parties are being forthright and really working towards a peaceful solution, a peaceful future between the two. And I think incentivizing EU membership and UN membership between both parties, because Serbia also wants to join the EU, I think making sure that that is conditioned on a peaceful future is probably the best way forward.
Okay. Is Kosovo being asked to take in refugees at this point? And along those similar lines, the questioner wants to know something about the welfare system in Kosovo. Are they equipped to take in refugees?
I know that they do have refugees there. I'm not sure if there's any sort of the quota that they've promulgated, if there's a number that they're willing to accept. As far as welfare goes, I'm not personally familiar with their welfare system. I know that there is social services, as with most European states. But I know unemployment is high, but there are government services for people, because if they do have a 50% unemployment rate with youth, there has to be some sort of public service structure. But I'm sorry, I don't know a better answer to that one.
More questions about peace in the area. Do you have any idea, any insight into how long the UN peacekeepers are likely to be there in Kosovo?
I don't think they're planning on moving them out anytime soon. I know they have a massive KFOR, a NATO base there, where they have, I think, 4,000 soldiers still today. My apartment was right in the city center, and you would see soldiers walk around with big guns. There was no immediate threat, but I think their presence, if they left, that could be a problem. Having Serbia just north, the relations aren't normalized enough that they could leave. So I think in the foreseeable future, I don't think if the UN or NATO are going to leave.
In a similar vein, the questioner asks, have international courts found any Kosovo government leaders guilty of any crimes vis-a-vis the Serbian conflict?
I know that they found Serbians guilty, but I don't know if they found any Albanian Kosovans guilty. This new court is specifically but it's geared towards KLA fighters, any involvement they have with organized crime and organ trafficking. So this is specifically against KLA, which are Albanian Kosovars. And so this is, I think, the first time any Kosovar would be prosecuted.
And those are ongoing, you said?
The court just started this month, so it's like brand new. They don't even think they've started yet.
Ali, can you tell us a little bit more about the Albanian legal system and what you gathered about how they're constructing it? I assume they had a Serbian legal system before independence, and how have they stuck pretty much with that system, or have they changed it?
They have. So Kosovo has two courts. They have a regular court, which anyone can access, and they have a constitutional court. They also are really pushing mediation as a way to solve conflicts, which I think is really interesting, and it seems very progressive, very European. But compared to before, I'm not completely sure.
Okay. Several people asked how your experience there in Kosovo may have influenced your career plans.
I have always had an interest in international law. My background, I studied international politics in undergrad as well as history. But in law school, I've taken kind of attached towards public health. And so if I could do something involving international law and public health, that would be ideal. So I don't know if I really want to go into State Department, which would have been what I was doing comparatively at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And because I was given so much autonomy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I was drafting agreements with Pakistan. And at the State Department, that would never happen. Like, I would never be able to do that. And so I think that would be that would frustrate me. But I think doing NGO work relating international law, human rights, public health, I think that would be my ideal future. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for your time.
All right. We now conclude our program, and I want to give a big thank you to Alle McNorton for her presentation. I also thank our sponsors, the University of Iowa's International Programs, the University of Iowa's Honors Program, the University of Iowa Public Policy Center, and the Stanley UI Foundation Support Organization for their generous support. And we also thank today's special sponsors, Maureen Braddock and Mike Carberry. And we thank City Channel 4 for making our programs available to viewing audiences. Ali, as a small token of our appreciation, I would like to present you with the highly coveted ICFRC mug. Thank you, everybody. We are adjourned.